August 29th, 2023. The crowd gathered around the globe of death, expecting exactly what the name promised. Danger. Controlled danger. The kind that looks impossible from the outside, but has been rehearsed so many times that people eventually stop believing anything can actually go wrong. The motorcycles enter the steel sphere, the engines roar, and within seconds, both riders are racing around the inside of the cage, climbing the walls through pure speed and momentum, while spectators watch from only a few feet away. At Wujinshan Happy Valley in Shanxi, China, the performance begins exactly as planned. The riders circle in perfect rhythm, round and round. The metal globe vibrates from the force of the motorcycles, while cameras in the audience follow every movement. Occasionally, sparks appear behind the bikes, but nothing about the act seems unusual. In a stunt built around friction, speed, and constant motion, flashes of light barely attract attention. Then something goes wrong. One of the riders suddenly loses control. The motorcycle drops toward the bottom of the sphere, and almost instantly, flames erupt inside the cage. There is no warning, no gradual buildup. 1 second, the stunt is continuing normally. The next, the entire bottom section of the globe of death is on fire. The footage becomes terrifying for another reason. There are still 2 performers inside. One rider is now trapped near the flames, while the second rider remains high on the walls of the sphere. Stopping isn't an option. Inside a globe of death, momentum keeps the motorcycles attached to the cage. Lose that momentum at the wrong moment, and another crash becomes almost inevitable. So while fire spreads beneath him, the second rider keeps moving. Lap after lap, circling above the flames. The image looks almost impossible. A motorcycle racing through a steel globe while fire burns below, and another performer lies near the center of the cage. Around the arena, panic replaces excitement. Staff sprint toward the stunt with fire extinguishers. Audience members begin backing away. Phones continue recording as the situation unfolds in real time. Within moments, extinguishers are blasting into the cage from every direction, while workers fight to contain the fire. The performance is over. But for one of the riders, the real battle is only beginning. At first, many people watching the footage believed he had escaped the accident with relatively minor injuries. The reality was far worse. The injured performer was 22-year-old Li Zhuo, a young acrobat who had spent years traveling across China, performing dangerous stunt acts. The burns covered most of his body. His face, neck, arms, legs, and torso had all been severely damaged. The injuries were so extensive that he would require intensive care, multiple surgeries, skin grafts, and a recovery measured in months rather than days. While the video itself lasts only seconds, the consequences continued long after the crowd had gone home. Inside the hospital, Li Zhuo faced an entirely different fight. Operation after operation, painful treatments, an uncertain recovery. His family later found themselves confronting overwhelming medical costs while hoping he could survive injuries that had transformed a routine performance into a life-threatening catastrophe. And watching the footage now, one detail makes the accident especially disturbing. Nothing dramatic fails. No massive structure collapses. No performer falls from a great height. Everything happens inside a steel cage only a few feet wide. A tiny moment, a split second, where something changes. And in an act built entirely around speed, a split second is all it takes. The crowd arrives expecting danger that has been carefully controlled. Instead, they witness the moment that control disappears. But while fire turned one talent show performance into a nightmare, another audience would soon watch a stunt go wrong in an entirely different way. Because this time, the accident wouldn't happen inside a steel globe. It would happen live on stage, in front of judges, cameras, and millions of viewers watching from home. Haroon from Mersin Extreme. November 17th, 2013. Talent shows are built around risk, not life and death risk. The kind of risk that makes an audience lean forward in their seats. A difficult note, a dangerous stunt, a trick that might fail. The possibility that something unexpected could happen is part of what keeps millions of people watching. But every once in a while, the unexpected becomes real. And the atmosphere inside the studio changes instantly. During an episode of Yetenek Siziniz Türkiye, the Turkish version of Got Talent, a stunt group called Mersin Extreme stepped onto the stage ready to perform one of the most ambitious acts of the night. The group specialized in high-energy extreme sports-style performances: skates, bicycles, ramps, large jumps. Everything about the act depended on speed and precision. From the moment the performance begins, the energy inside the studio rises. The audience cheers as the group races across the stage, building momentum for increasingly difficult tricks. The judges watch closely, while cameras move between the performers and the crowd. For several minutes, everything goes exactly as planned. Then comes the jump. One of the performers, Haroon, accelerates toward a stunt that requires perfect timing. The margin for error is almost non-existent. Miss the angle by even a small amount, and the landing changes completely. As he launches into the air, the audience expects another successful trick. Instead, something goes wrong. Haroon loses control. The fall is immediate. There isn't enough time for anyone to react. He crashes hard near the edge of the stage and slams into the ground with enough force that the entire studio seems to freeze. For a moment, nobody moves. The audience falls silent. The judges stare toward the floor. And Haroon doesn't get up. That's the part that makes the footage difficult to watch, not the impact itself. The stillness afterward. A talent show stage is normally filled with noise, music, applause, hosts talking, judges reacting. But after the fall, all of that disappears. Haroon remains motionless. Crew members rush forward. Medical personnel move onto the stage. And what began as a routine performance suddenly feels frighteningly real. Among the judges, the shock is visible. The reactions aren't those of television personalities performing for the camera. They look genuinely worried. One judge, Hulya Avshar, becomes visibly emotional as the seriousness of the situation begins to sink in. The competition no longer matters. The performance no longer matters. Everyone is focused on one thing: whether Haroon is okay. As medics work around him, the audience watches in complete silence. Nobody knows how badly he has been injured. Nobody knows whether he can move. For several long moments, the only certainty is that a stunt designed to entertain has ended with a performer lying on the floor, surrounded by emergency staff. Eventually, Haroon is taken from the stage and transported for medical treatment. The competition cannot simply continue as though nothing happened. The performance is stopped. The group's appearance is postponed. And for the rest of the night, the accident hangs over the entire show. Fortunately, the outcome could have been much worse. Haroon survives the fall and recovers from his injuries. But the footage remains unsettling because it captures the exact moment a television audience realizes that what they're watching isn't part of the act. There are no special effects, no scripted drama, just a performer attempting a dangerous stunt in front of millions of viewers and a split second where everything changes. One successful landing, and the moment is forgotten. One mistake, and it becomes one of the most remembered accidents in the show's history. But while Haroon's fall shocked a television audience, another performer would face a far greater drop. Because the next accident wouldn't happen a few feet above a stage. It would happen nearly 100 feet in the air. Pedro Aunion Monroy Fall. July 7th, 2017. By the time darkness settled over Madrid, tens of thousands of people had gathered at the Mad Cool Festival for one of the biggest nights of the summer. The main stages were surrounded by crowds waiting for the next performance, while music, lights, and movement filled nearly every corner of the festival grounds. Between the concerts, another performance was preparing to begin high above the audience. Suspended roughly 90 feet in the air was a small illuminated cage. Inside it stood Pedro Aunion Monroy, a veteran aerial performer whose career had been built around movement, choreography, and performances that took place far above the ground. After more than 2 decades in the industry, working at height was simply part of his craft. From below, the act looked almost surreal. The glowing structure hovered against the night sky, while Pedro moved carefully inside it, illuminated above thousands of spectators. For many people in the crowd, it was an unexpected sight. They had come for a music festival, yet now their attention was fixed on a performer suspended high above the venue. The routine depended on a series of aerial transitions performed within and around the cage. As the act progressed, Pedro moved through the structure with the calm precision of someone who had done this countless times before. Nothing about the performance suggested that anything was wrong. Then he reached the final section of the routine. This was the moment that would take him out of the cage and into open space, suspended by a separate safety system beneath the structure. From the ground, it appeared to be just another carefully planned transition within the performance. But something happened during that changeover. At first, many people didn't realize they were witnessing an accident. The movement began in a way that looked consistent with the act itself. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Pedro was performing the planned descent. Then the crowd understood. He wasn't descending, he was falling. The realization spread almost instantly through the audience. Thousands of people watched as Pedro dropped from the illuminated structure toward the ground below. At that height, there was no opportunity to recover and no time for anyone to intervene. Within seconds, emergency personnel were rushing toward the scene, while the festival grounds fell into a stunned silence. Conversations stopped. People who had been focused on the stages only moments earlier turned their attention toward the area where he had fallen. The atmosphere across the festival changed completely. What had begun as an artistic performance, suspended above the crowd, had ended in front of thousands of witnesses. Despite immediate medical intervention, Pedro Aunion Monroy didn't survive the fall. He was 42 years old. For many people who were there that night, the most haunting part wasn't the height itself, or even the suddenness of the accident. It was how quickly the meaning of the performance changed. Moments earlier, the illuminated cage hanging above the crowd had been part of the spectacle. After the fall, it became impossible to look at that same image without thinking about what had happened beneath it. In the days that followed, discussions focused on the final transition of the act and the safety systems involved. But for those who witnessed it firsthand, the memory remained much simpler. A performer suspended high above a festival crowd, a routine that appeared to be unfolding normally, and a moment when something that looked controlled suddenly wasn't. Ringling Brothers, Human Chandelier, Fall, May 4th, 2014. Circus performers spend years learning to trust the equipment above them. Every cable, every connection, every piece of rigging suspended high over the arena floor. Without that trust, many aerial acts would be impossible to perform. Inside the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence, Rhode Island, nearly 4,000 spectators had gathered for a morning performance of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey's Legends show. Families filled the seats, children watched from the front rows, and the performance was unfolding exactly as audiences expected. One of the featured acts that day was known as the Human Chandelier. It was designed to be beautiful before it was ever meant to be dangerous. High above the circus floor, 8 aerialists were suspended from a large rotating metal structure. Some hung around the outer edge, while others were positioned closer to the center, creating the appearance of a giant chandelier floating in midair. As the apparatus rotated, the performers moved together in a carefully synchronized display that had become one of the show's signature attractions. From the audience, the act looked effortless. The performers appeared calm and composed as they rotated above the arena, suspended entirely by their hair and connected to the apparatus overhead. Few people watching had any reason to think something was wrong. Then, without warning, the entire structure failed. A critical connection above the performers suddenly gave way. The audience watched as the chandelier dropped from the air. All 8 aerialists fell with it. The collapse happened so quickly that many spectators struggled to process what they had just seen. One moment, the performers were suspended above the arena floor. The next, the entire apparatus was crashing downward, carrying all 8 women with it before slamming into another performer positioned below. The impact echoed through the arena. What had been a circus performance only seconds earlier instantly became an emergency scene. The show stopped immediately. Performers rushed toward the fallen group, while medical personnel entered the arena floor. Around the venue, thousands of spectators sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what had just happened. For the aerialists, the consequences were devastating. The fall left multiple performers with severe injuries, including broken bones, spinal trauma, damaged joints, and internal injuries. Recovery would not be measured in days or weeks. For some, it would take years. Several required extensive rehabilitation, and 2 of the women were left with life-altering neurological injuries that would continue affecting them long after the circus left Providence. What makes the footage so disturbing is how ordinary everything appears right before the collapse. There is no visible warning, no obvious sign that the apparatus is about to fail. The performers continue the routine exactly as they had countless times before. The audience remains relaxed. The music continues playing. Then the entire act disappears from the air. Later, examinations of the rigging revealed that a key component had been subjected to forces it was never meant to handle. A small problem high above the arena floor ultimately brought down an apparatus carrying 8 performers at once. And that's what separates this accident from many others. Most talent show and circus accidents involve a single performer. One mistake, one fall, one person in danger. Here, an entire group went down together. 8 performers trusted the same system at the same moment. When that system failed, every one of them paid the price. Years later, the Human Chandelier accident remains one of the most infamous circus disasters ever captured on camera. Not because it involved a risky stunt gone wrong, but because the performers did everything they were supposed to do. The routine was underway, the choreography was working, the act was progressing normally. And still, within seconds, everything changed. But while the Human Chandelier collapse involved trained professionals performing high above an arena floor, the next accident would unfold during an event involving children. What began as a celebratory group photo would end with an entire section of a stage suddenly disappearing beneath them. Children's dance audition. Stage collapse. May 25, 2019. Talent competitions are usually remembered for the performers who stand out. A great audition, a memorable routine, a child whose performance impresses the judges. At the Jinshuixian Grand Theater in Fujian, China, hundreds of families had gathered for exactly that kind of event. The day had been filled with children's dance performances, auditions, and selections, with parents watching proudly from the audience, while young dancers took turns on stage. By the evening, the event was nearing its conclusion. The performances were over, the pressure was gone, and attention shifted toward what should have been one of the safest moments of the entire day. A group photo. Dozens of children, parents, instructors, and event staff began gathering on stage to commemorate the occasion. More and more people joined the photo until the stage became crowded with smiling participants trying to fit into the frame. Nothing about the scene appeared dangerous. The children were no longer dancing. Nobody was performing stunts. Nobody was attempting anything risky. The event was essentially over. Then the floor gave way. Near the center of the stage, a lifting platform suddenly collapsed beneath the crowd. The failure happened so quickly that many people never had a chance to react. One moment, the group was standing together for a photograph. The next, a large section of the stage opened beneath them, sending children and adults plunging into the space below. The footage is shocking because of how ordinary the moment appears beforehand. There is no visible panic, no warning from staff, no sign that anything is wrong. Then, almost instantly, the center of the stage disappears. People fall into the opening while others slide toward it. Children tumble into the pit below. Adults attempt to grab onto anything within reach. The carefully organized photo dissolves into confusion, screams, and chaos. Inside the theater, nobody immediately understands the scale of what has happened. Parents rush forward. Children cry out for help. People scramble to pull victims from the collapsed section, while emergency services are called to the scene. What had started as a celebration becomes an emergency within seconds. The collapse leaves multiple children and adults injured. Some suffer cuts, bruises, and soft tissue injuries from the fall, while others require more extensive medical treatment. Hospitals across the area begin receiving victims as families search for information about their children and loved ones. For one family, however, the outcome is far worse. Among those caught in the collapse was a young participant who could not be saved despite emergency treatment. The tragedy transformed what should have been a memorable day into something entirely different. As investigators examined the scene, attention focused on the lifting platform beneath the stage and the systems supporting it. The section that failed had been hidden beneath the performance area, unseen by the children and adults standing above it only moments earlier. That detail makes the accident especially unsettling. Unlike many stage disasters, this wasn't caused by a performer attempting something dangerous. The people on stage believed the event was already over. The risk had passed. The dancing had ended. The applause had faded. Everyone was simply gathering for a photograph before going home. Instead, the final image of the day became one of confusion and panic as a stage full of children suddenly collapsed beneath their feet. And for many of the families who were there, that's what made the accident so difficult to process. The danger didn't arrive during the performance. It arrived afterward, during the moment that seemed safest. But while the collapse in Fujian happened because a structure beneath the stage failed, the next accident would begin with a decision made by a performer himself, a magician. 5 identical glasses, and a live television audience watching as he accidentally chose the only one that could seriously injure him. Tran fat acid trick. January 11th, 2015. Magic relies on uncertainty. The audience doesn't know what's going to happen. The judges don't know what's going to happen. And if the trick is convincing enough, even the possibility of failure becomes part of the performance. During a live semi-final of Vietnam's Got Talent, 21-year-old magician Tran Ton Phat walked onto the stage with a routine built entirely around that uncertainty. In front of him sat 5 identical glasses. At first glance, they looked completely ordinary. Clear liquid. No labels. No visible difference between any of them. But hidden among the glasses was a dangerous detail. 4 contained water. 1 contained diluted sulfuric acid. The liquids were visually indistinguishable, and once the glasses had been shuffled, nobody in the audience could tell them apart. That uncertainty was the entire trick. A judge was invited to mix the glasses while Tran Ton Fat looked away. By the time the shuffle was complete, the location of the acid was unknown to everyone except the person who had moved it. The tension inside the studio rose immediately. Unlike many magic acts, there was no elaborate equipment on stage, no locked boxes, no giant illusions. Just 5 glasses lined up in front of a young performer, preparing to trust his instincts in front of a live audience. The first choice went perfectly. He selected a glass, drank from it, and continued without hesitation. Water. The audience applauded. The trick appeared to be unfolding exactly as intended. Then he reached for the second glass. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He lifted it, took a drink, and almost immediately realized something was wrong. The reaction is visible the moment it happens. His expression changes. He spits the liquid out. His hand goes to his mouth, and the atmosphere inside the studio transforms instantly. Only seconds earlier, the audience had been watching a suspenseful magic routine. Now they were watching a real emergency unfold in front of them. What makes the footage so uncomfortable is that there is no dramatic collapse or visible panic. Instead, there is a brief moment where everyone understands the same thing at once. He picked the wrong glass. The judges stare in disbelief. The audience falls silent. And Tran Ton Fat stands there trying to process what just happened. Despite the pain, he manages to remain remarkably composed. Rather than immediately collapsing or running from the stage, he attempts to maintain control of the situation. But the effects are becoming increasingly obvious. His face grows pale. Speaking becomes difficult. The confidence that had been there moments earlier is replaced by the realization that this is no longer part of the act. After leaving the stage, he is rushed for medical treatment. The acid had burned portions of his mouth and throat, leaving injuries that required specialized care and close monitoring. Over the following days, doctors focused on limiting further damage and ensuring the burns healed properly. Fortunately, the outcome could have been much worse. The liquid had been diluted, and the amount that entered his mouth was limited before he realized the mistake. Even so, the accident left him facing painful injuries from a routine that had gone wrong in a matter of seconds. The incident sparked debate almost immediately. Some viewers struggled to believe the mistake had been genuine. Others saw it as a clear example of how quickly a dangerous performance can spiral beyond a performer's control. Regardless of what people believed afterward, the footage itself captured something undeniably real. The exact moment a magician discovered that chance had turned against him. That's what continues to make the clip memorable years later. Most dangerous magic acts create the illusion of risk while remaining carefully controlled behind the scenes. This time, the risk was real. A single decision separated success from disaster. And before a live television audience, Tran Ton Fat chose the wrong glass. But while one magician accidentally exposed himself to a dangerous substance during a live broadcast, the next performer would suffer a terrifying accident while suspended high above the stage. And this time, the fall would happen in front of a sold-out Cirque du Soleil audience. Maria Konfektova, August 24, 2024. Cirque du Soleil. Performances are designed to create the illusion that gravity doesn't exist. Performers spin through the air, balance in impossible positions, and move with a level of control that makes even difficult routines appear effortless. For the audience, part of the experience comes from forgetting how dangerous many of those acts actually are. During an evening performance of Kuza in Portland, Oregon, aerial artist Maria Konfektova stepped into a routine she had performed many times before. The act centered around an aerial hoop suspended above the stage. As the performance began, Maria rose into the air and started moving through the routine while the hoop rotated beneath her. From the audience, everything looked normal. The act was unfolding exactly the way spectators expected from a Cirque du Soleil production. Precise, elegant, and seemingly effortless. Nothing about the opening moments suggested that the performance was about to stop. As the hoop continued spinning, Maria transitioned through a series of movements high above the stage. Audience members watched quietly while the act progressed, focused on the performer rather than the risk surrounding her. Then something changed. In the middle of the routine, Maria suddenly lost control. The fall happened so quickly that many people struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. For a brief moment, some spectators assumed it was part of the choreography. Cirque productions often include dramatic drops and unexpected movements, and from a distance, it wasn't immediately obvious that anything had gone wrong. That confusion lasted only seconds. Maria fell from the hoop and struck the stage below. The reaction inside the venue was immediate. Gasps echoed through the audience. The music stopped, and the performance came to an abrupt halt. One spectator later described realizing something was wrong the moment she hit the floor. Another recalled hearing the impact, and then noticing that the crowd had gone completely silent. What had looked like another carefully planned aerial sequence had suddenly become an emergency unfolding in front of hundreds of people. For several moments, Maria remained on the stage, while performers and medical personnel rushed toward her. The audience watched anxiously. Nobody knew how badly she had been hurt. The uncertainty made the scene especially uncomfortable, because only moments earlier, the act had looked so controlled. There had been no obvious warning, no visible equipment failure, and no indication that the routine was drifting toward danger. Eventually, Maria was helped from the stage. As she was being carried away, she managed to give a thumbs up to the crowd, a small gesture that immediately eased some of the panic spreading through the audience. It was the first clear sign that she was conscious and aware of what was happening around her. Even so, the injuries were significant. The fall left her with multiple fractures and required extensive medical treatment. The routine was removed from the show's Portland run, and attention quickly turned toward understanding how such an experienced aerial artist could have fallen during a performance that appeared to be progressing normally. That's one of the reasons the footage remains so unsettling. Many circus accidents involve a visible mistake, a missed landing, or a moment where the audience can see something beginning to go wrong. Here, the transition is almost invisible. One moment, Maria is spinning through the air. The next, she's falling toward the stage. For the people watching, there is no gradual buildup. The performance simply shifts from elegance to emergency in a matter of seconds. Fortunately, Maria survived the accident and later reassured fans that she was recovering. But for those inside the tent that night, the image that stayed with them wasn't the aftermath. It was the moment before it. A performer suspended high above the stage, a routine unfolding normally, and a sudden loss of control that nobody in the audience saw coming. But while Maria's accident happened in full view of a live audience, the next performer would face a different kind of danger altogether. Because this time, the threat wasn't a fall. It was running out of air while trapped underwater inside a locked tank. Pedro Volta water tank escape. December 2019. Escapology is built on a simple idea. The audience watches someone enter a situation that appears impossible to survive, then waits for the moment they somehow escape. For more than a century, performers have locked themselves inside boxes, chains, handcuffs, and underwater tanks, trusting that preparation, timing, and experience will allow them to emerge safely before disaster strikes. Pedro Volta understood that better than most. The Spanish illusionist had built part of his career around dangerous escape acts, including underwater routines inspired by the legendary performances of Harry Houdini. By the time he appeared in the live semifinals of Got Talent España, he already knew how quickly things could go wrong. In fact, he had nearly died performing a similar escape only a year earlier. That history made the performance even more tense. As the live show began, Pedro entered a large water tank positioned on stage. He wore restraints and a straitjacket, while the audience watched from only a few feet away. Once inside, the challenge was straightforward in theory, but brutal in practice. Free yourself, unlock the restraints, escape before the oxygen runs out. From outside the tank, the setup looked deceptively simple. The audience could see everything. The judges could see everything. And yet nobody could help once the countdown truly began. As Pedro disappeared beneath the water, the atmosphere inside the studio changed. The usual excitement of a talent competition gave way to a quieter tension. Every second mattered now, and everyone in the room understood it. At first, the escape appeared to be progressing normally. Pedro worked through the restraints methodically, while air bubbles rose toward the surface. The audience followed every movement, watching for signs that he was getting closer to freedom. But as time passed, something felt wrong. The pace slowed, the struggle became more visible, and the longer Pedro remained underwater, the more uncomfortable the room became. Judges leaned forward. Audience members watched in silence. The confidence that usually accompanies an escape act began to disappear. Inside the tank, Pedro was still fighting with the final stages of the escape. Outside, people were beginning to realize he might be running out of time. The tension reached a breaking point when it became clear he wasn't going to free himself before exhausting his air supply. Moments later, the performance stopped being a stunt. It became a rescue. Medical personnel and crew members rushed toward the tank as Pedro's body began showing signs of severe distress underwater. The audience watched in horror as the emergency unfolded live on television. After being pulled from the tank, he required immediate medical attention. For several frightening moments, nobody inside the studio knew how serious the situation was. The judges looked shaken, the audience remained silent, and the competition itself suddenly felt irrelevant. Fortunately, Pedro recovered. Once he was able to speak again, he reassured everyone that he was okay. But the experience clearly left an impression on him. Standing on stage after the ordeal, he explained that he would never perform that particular escape again. The decision carried extra weight because this wasn't his first close call. Only a year earlier, another underwater escape had gone catastrophically wrong, leaving him unconscious and requiring rescuers to pull him from a tank before reviving him. Returning to perform a similar stunt after surviving something like that already required enormous confidence. Experiencing another life-threatening emergency convinced him he had reached the end of that chapter. What makes the footage so memorable isn't a dramatic fall or a violent accident. It's the gradual realization that the clock is winning. Every escape act creates tension by making the audience wonder whether the performer will get out in time. This time, that question stopped feeling theoretical. As the seconds passed, viewers watched a performer fight against restraints, dwindling oxygen, and the growing possibility that he might not escape at all. For a few terrifying moments, nobody knew how the story would end. And that's exactly what made it one of the most disturbing accidents ever captured on a talent show stage. But while Pedro Volta's emergency unfolded inside a water tank, the final case on this list would happen high above the stage floor. A ladder, a live semi-final, and a fall that nearly ended a performer's dream just seconds before the finish line. Uzair Novruzov ladder fall. September 8, 2015. By the time the semi-finals of America's Got Talent arrived, Uzair Novruzov had already become one of the most unique performers left in the competition. While most contestants relied on music, comedy, or elaborate stage productions, Uzair walked onto the stage carrying something far simpler: a ladder, At first glance, it looked almost absurdly ordinary, but audiences quickly learned that the ladder was only the beginning. Uzair had spent years developing an act built around balance, precision, and an extraordinary willingness to trust his own body. Inspired by silent film performers and classic circus artists, he transformed a simple ladder into one of the most dangerous props on the entire show. The concept was deceptively simple. The execution was anything but. As the semi-final performance began, Uzair climbed onto the freestanding ladder while the audience watched in near silence. Unlike a normal ladder, there were no visible supports holding it in place. Every movement shifted the balance. Every adjustment carried consequences. The higher he climbed, the more uncomfortable the act became to watch. What made the performance effective wasn't speed or spectacle. It was the constant awareness that one mistake could send him crashing to the stage. Throughout the routine, Uzair continued raising the difficulty. He balanced on the upper sections of the ladder, shifted his weight into increasingly unstable positions, and performed tricks that seemed to defy common sense. The judges watched nervously. The audience reacted to every movement, and somehow, he kept making it work. As the routine approached its conclusion, Uzair prepared for the final trick. Everything had been building toward this moment. Standing near the top of the ladder, he attempted to hook a hoop beneath his foot while maintaining his balance high above the stage. It was the kind of move that required absolute precision, especially after several minutes of physical and mental exhaustion. For a moment, it appeared he might pull it off. Then the ladder shifted, the balance disappeared, and the entire structure tipped backward. The fall happened instantly. Uzair crashed from the top of the ladder and slammed onto the stage floor in front of the judges, audience, and millions of viewers watching live at home. A collective gasp swept through the theater. The performance stopped, and for a few seconds, nobody knew whether he had been seriously injured. Fortunately, he quickly sat up. The relief inside the room was immediate. Judges who had been watching through their fingers moments earlier suddenly looked far less concerned once it became clear he was conscious and able to move. But even though he appeared physically okay, the emotional impact of the accident was obvious. Uzair looked devastated. The fall hadn't happened at the beginning of the routine. It hadn't happened during a practice run. It happened at the very end, after successfully navigating every other challenge the act had thrown at him. Still determined to finish what he started, he immediately asked for another chance. He wanted more time, just enough to climb back up and complete the trick correctly. But live television doesn't stop. The judges sympathized, yet the competition had to continue. The performance ended there. Not with applause for a successful finish, but with a performer staring at the final obstacle that had defeated him only moments earlier. Even after the fall, he was taken for medical evaluation and underwent precautionary testing to make sure he hadn't suffered a more serious injury. Thankfully, the outcome was far better than many people feared while watching the accident unfold. And in an unexpected twist, the fall didn't end his journey on the show. Despite the mistake, audiences continued supporting him, and he advanced to the finals. That detail says a lot about why the moment remains memorable. The audience wasn't simply impressed by the stunt itself, they understood how difficult it was. The fall proved there were no hidden supports, no camera tricks, and no safety net waiting just outside the frame. Everything people had been watching was real. Years later, when reflecting on the accident, Uzair would describe the failed stunt in simple terms. He could have died. Watching the footage now, it's easy to understand why. The act depended entirely on balance. For several minutes, he managed to maintain it perfectly. Then, only seconds before the finish line, gravity finally won.